Hey there. So I just want to go over what I'm calling the inner child approach. Uh, what I like about this and what I'm about to go through is A, it's based on my own experience. I find myself using this in sessions and it being helpful for people, as well as helpful for myself. And the second thing that I like is I think it's really approachable. No pun intended. I'll get to that in a second. So, what is this approach? So we approach our inner experience as if there were a younger version of ourselves who was hurt and needs our help. Um, I want you to notice the contrast here for some among us who might be really firmly entrenched in non dual spirituality, because this approach is requiring us to actually validate our inner experience, which is more like reclaiming or reowning something that's been lost, some piece of us that we've rejected and pushed into the background, rather than needing to see no self. So, contextually speaking, it's just a different requirement. It's only really asking you to see what's true for you, the truth that you've buried from yourself, so to speak, rather than needing to see some type of grand thing to see what's ultimately true, objectively true, to see the truth of life. This isn't asking that of you. It's only asking you to see what's true for you. So, in that way, you can relax. It's a much lower bar, and you're good enough to do it. So typically, this child that we're talking about, it arises in a painful memory where we treated in our authenticity for safety. That's to say, we didn't feel safe feeling or expressing something. So instead, we created some strategy, such as stuffing that down and hiding it, trying to manipulate others in some way. We created a strategy to try to manage the fact that this emotion's here, but it doesn't feel safe to feel and or express the emotion. So, some steps to go through to experience this approach for yourself. So, step one is just notice the trigger. So, presumably, if we're going through this process, there's something that's up for you that's worth looking into. And we're going to start by just noticing what's here. So, what thoughts or feelings are here for you right now? So, just take a moment and rest with those thoughts and feelings. Simply see or hear the thoughts that are coming through. Breathe with your experience. And as you're noticing thoughts and noticing the breath, allow your attention to naturally drop into the body. We really want to notice any sense of agitation or distress in the body that's driving the thought, something that it feels like you have to solve. So allow your attention to drop into the body. We want to establish contact with our bodily experience. And once you've come to rest, you want to try to locate the child. So you're sitting with the thoughts and feelings. Did you notice a particular memory stood out to you while you were doing that? And if so, that's great because this might be a really good starting point. If there's like a particular memory, say you're feeling into the trigger and then you have a memory of come up of something that happened when you were 6. Perfect. Hold that there. I'm going to go through some other bullet points, but hold that there if that did happen for you. And if you're just sitting with a sensation, but there's no particular memory that comes up, you might want to try a mining question, such as when was the first time you felt this way, to bring up a memory. Now, you might not actually need a particular memory to bring up this sense of an inner child. And this is what I find happening for myself actually quite a bit. I'm very auditory and not at all visual. And I don't tend to experience memories of time and place. And if I do, it's very hard for me to see it. So this is just to say that the memory isn't necessarily required to do this. This is more about the approach than what's actually coming up than the material that's coming up and the particularities of that material. Although the particularities of the material might change the way we approach it. So if you're seeing an actual scenario with yourself as a child, that gives us different options than if we're just feeling something or we're only hearing words come through. But with that said, your experience doesn't have to show up in a particular way in order for this approach to be useful. If you can't locate the child at all, you don't see the child, there's no felt experience of the child, which may not really mean much to you having not gone through the process before, but that's something that um, you'll intuitively know what that means once you've gone through this. If you can't locate the child, that's okay. We're just going to move on to step 3 then. Because if you can't locate the child at all, it's likely that there are some defenses in the way. The child may not trust you straight away, and if so, we need to honor the child's reasons for distrust. Think of it this way: there's like a lifetime of you having pushed this child into the background, of making this child's needs less important than dealing with the needs of your everyday life, of what life's asking you to handle. We all do this. There's no blame or shame in any of it. But it's acknowledging that this child's needs have not been met for a long time. So if the child's distrustful and you're not able to make contact with that child straight away, there's good reason for it. And the reason I bring this up is because we don't want to become punitive with ourselves for our quote unquote resistance. This ensures that we won't be able to establish contact with this inner child. And just as a small other side note here, even calling it resistance instead of something else like saying, it's the child's defenses at play, it can reveal a punitive mindset in us. So really be on the lookout for whether your relationship to what we're calling the child's defenses or resistance here. Notice your relationship to that. Is it like, oh my gosh, I'm doing this wrong, I'm never going to get inquiry right, I'm a lost cause? Because if so, it's going to make it impossible to really get in touch with that inner child if we're not looking at that resistance. If we're not taking the time to really be with that resistance, and instead trying to pressure ourselves into having a particular experience that we think we're supposed to have, an experience where there's clarity, or where the resistance drops, or where I just feel better, right? If we're trying to pressure ourselves into that in any way, instead of honoring the fact that the resistance is here, that's going to muck up the works. So if there is resistance here, we need to honor it. The child's not going to come out until it feels safe to do so. The child does not want to be judged. You don't want to be judged. So we need to make room for these defenses that come up. And the judgment itself is part of that defense process, right? Because we're trying to bypass a particular painful experience. That's all that's trying to do, right? This judging is I'm trying to judge myself into having a different experience. I think it's going to work. It's a naive strategy for dealing with an inner conflict that I haven't been able to solve. So a way to approach this all, right, especially if it's really overwhelming, like there's a ton of resistance coming up, I feel like I'm a piece of shit who's never going to get inquiry right. So the approach to all of this is, how would you treat a hurt child that doesn't trust you yet? Understanding defenses can soften them. So I expected that bullet to say something else, so I'm going to stick with the how would you treat a hurt child that doesn't trust you yet for now. Let's actually scroll back up. Boop. All right. So how would you treat a hurt child that doesn't trust you yet? Would you blame them for the fact that they don't trust you yet? What would you expect to happen if you did so? If you're like, hey, you should just trust me. You should just trust me. The fact that you don't trust me means there's something wrong with you. The child's going to shut down more. Instead, we need to come to a place of really listening to this child and trying to understand why they have these defenses in place. And this understanding of the defenses can actually help soften them. It's the difference between self-condemnation and self-compassion. And as a practical note, utility inquiry is often really useful here. What do I get out of blaming myself? What does the child get out of pushing me away? Tailor the inquiry to what's actually coming up for you. But this type of use of utility inquiry here can really help bring about this experience of self-compassion instead. And that self-compassion is really going to help you get closer to the child. And as a note, my face is in the way of the slide a little bit. That's unfortunate. Can I turn that off for a moment? Cool. All right. So if you're seeing the child, you may put yourself in the image with the child, right? So say there's a memory from when you were 6 of something that happened and you're seeing yourself as a child. Notice how close the child is comfortable with you getting. So if you put yourself as an adult in that image, what's the distance? How far away are you? Maybe the child lets you sit right next to them straight away. Maybe you're 6 feet away. Maybe you're even further away than that, but notice where you are in that image. And this isn't about trying to force yourself to get closer or force the child to feel comfortable with you getting closer. It's just noticing what's already the case. Where is the child comfortable with you being so far? So, in all this, what we're looking to do is establish contact with the child. So, for some people, especially if you've gone through this before a few times, the process up to this point may all happen pretty quickly. There's no defense to work through. So, it's like you're sitting with the trigger, you're feeling something, you have the memory come up, and you're just right there with the child, and the child lets you in right away. So, if you've done a lot of work, it might be more like that, where there's not really a whole lot of defense to work through. Oh, well, okay. Anyway, so what might this be like to establish contact with the child? It might be that there's a felt experience of authentic emotion. You're feeling a softening into sadness, or you're feeling anger arise, right? And it feels like the emotion's actually here, whereas before it was not clear what was going on. There was more of a just an unclear experience in the body, or an experience of tension or contraction. Where now there's emotion. Or it might just be a sense that you're with the child, even if some defenses remain. So if it's visual, you might be sitting next to the child now, as opposed to, being 6 feet away or whatever it was before. Any remaining defenses that are present might not be towards you as the adult self. It's like you've been let in to the child's inner circle now. The child trusts you now. But these defenses might be towards others instead. That's to say the child doesn't feel safe to feel or express what's really true for them in front of a parent or a sibling or a teacher. But at this point, they trust you. And that's really what's key. And what I really mean when I say establishing contact is getting to the point where the child does trust you enough to let you into their inner experience, to let you in on what's going on. So they're no longer defensive towards you as the adult self. So now that we've been let in, the child trusts us, it's a question of how we can best meet the child's needs. So if you are visual, you might see yourself at this point hugging the child or holding their hand. What does the child need, and how can you help? That's the question at this point. And really the approach overall is, what does this child need, and how can you help? If you're going to sum this up in like 2 sentences, I think that might be it. Even through the process of them having those defenses, right? Because at that point, the child in a way needs reassurance. It needs to know that you're trustworthy enough for the child to drop their defenses. But that doesn't happen from you pressuring yourself, does it? Because it's almost like that further proves the need for defenses, because you're not safe enough to be with yourself. You're not safe enough for this child, which is you, to come up to the surface, this part of you to come up to the surface, because you're not safe for yourself. You are the punitive parent when you're letting those defenses rule the roost. So, what does a child need, and how can you help? Some things they may need include, these are just examples that I've seen and experienced, having you stay with them through a challenging past event. So there's this memory that comes up of a time that was traumatic, of an event that was traumatic. And they might just need someone to hold their hand and be with them in that scenario or in that situation. They may actually want to go through that event and rewrite what happened. So you're with them and helping them, and almost like you're being their advocate, if necessary, as they express an emotion or set a boundary, say something that went unsaid. They might want an apology from you. And this happens for me a lot personally, where I'm apologizing to myself for my own disregard for myself. So they might want an apology for not standing up for them, or for judging them, or invalidating their experience in some way. And it might be that they just need you to listen to and validate their emotional experience because no one else could at the time, or they just didn't feel safe sharing what was really happening for them So once you've done this, you're gonna likely notice a shift, a felt sense of release or an understanding that wasn't there before. There's going to be a felt sense of closeness between you and this inner child, so to speak, which is really you becoming closer to yourself, of having a new sense of compassion for yourself that wasn't there when you began this process. So now that we've gone through it, we want to establish a new context if possible. Let this inner child know, let this part know that they're free to come and go as they want, that you're here for them and you want to listen to them and hear their story. And I didn't include this in the slide, but that you're grateful that they were willing to show up, that they were brave enough to be here and and make their story known, to tell you their story, and to show up authentically with you, that they were brave enough to trust you. And let them know they can come back at any time. And ask how you can help them going forward, because there had been some sense of pushing the child away or making their needs unimportant. So, what can you do for them to establish a new relationship going forward where you're not mistreating them in the way that you have before, where you're not mistreating yourself in the way that you had before? So, that's pretty much it for this. If you give this a shot, let me know how it goes. If you have any questions, let me know. You can leave it in the comments, or if you're able to direct message me, go ahead and direct message me. Yeah, cool. I hope people try this out. And I also, I hope it's helpful for people that, um, yeah, I think that I just feel compelled to remake that point I made before about how punitive the non-dual context can become for some of us, where we set up this idea of what enlightenment is and how things are supposed to look, and we continue to measure ourselves up against that ideal. And I'm hoping that this can be another way in for people who have done that or are struggling with that exact dynamic. And for anyone else who sees this and thinks it might be helpful. So yeah, cool guys, thanks. Thanks for watching.